Hey guys, good morning. It is 8:30 a.m. August 18th, 2020. Toss was down yesterday. Thinkorswim was having some issues, so didn't really do much trading yesterday. Last week we had a really unbelievable mover on one of the IPOs we traded, which was CVAC. Incredible. You really couldn't go wrong unless you got stopped out. It definitely gapped up higher than I wanted to see. But given the backing of the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, and being in the vaccine quote unquote sector, this one was fantastic. And a little seller's remorse, having it gapped up so big the next day that I had a big position and scaled it down into the closed almost nothing. And here was the intraday move on the opening day, which if we look at 5-minute charts on that one, you can see it was just a fantastic mover. Hopefully we don't have problems with Thinkorswim today. Looks like it's already delayed and slow, which drove me a little crazy. But the move was fantastic. I mean, it gapped up and then sold back down. Remember, these are 5-minute charts. I was using 1 minute, obviously, to start with. So as soon as it bottomed out and broke the high, it was off to the races. And then it kind of pulled back to what we would say would be the pivot breakout, which was right around 44, where I bought more shares at 43.90, and then rocketed back again into the close. And then, man, did they gap it up the next day. Pre-market, I think it was as high as 90. Unbelievable move in CVAC. There you can see the pre-market high was 95. So I think it was a little bit. So let me get back to the market here in general. This market, and I've been trading for many, many years, is the hardest market I've ever had to discern direction technically. I think we were doing good when things were pulling back and things were, a little bit, there's a little bit of uncertainty from a psychological perspective on the virus and how it's going to affect the economy and why the market was moving higher. It's easier to gauge the market movements technically within channels and pullbacks and volume and stuff like that than it has been right now. Right now, there's only one way to even try to figure out where things are going right now. When you look at stocks like Tesla, technically, I fundamentally I couldn't imagine buying at this level. Although they've really done some, gone through some leaps and bounds to get where they're at right now on a price per share or a earnings per share perspective. Technically, the stock has had a incredible run. I mean, it's almost, you have to look at RSI. So if we look at historical RSI on Tesla, it's usually had a big correction once it gets back above 90 on the RSI. In fact, it even becomes a little bit vulnerable when it gets above 84 or 85. So we're not even into the 80s yet. This little pullback kind of cleansed out some of that overbought condition, and now we have more room to the upside. It sounds insane on Tesla. Yesterday I was looking at it technically, and I just bought 20 shares because I'm like, it's almost hard to fathom buying something a larger position without a stop. But you could have a 6 or 7 point drop and take you out, and then it could run 30 or 40 points. So when we look at things like S&P 500 SPY, and we look at the historical RSI, which is all we can really go by these days. Once again, more room. We're not even in the red zone yet, so we should easily break the all-time high of 339. Now it might be more of a psychological thing, and that which takes me to my next point. For years and years and years, the market's been at least based on some levels of fundamentals. And I'm not saying right now that the earnings haven't been good in the S&P 500, but when I look at things that I tended to look at in the past, they're not really affecting the market like they should in current time. And what I'm talking about is things like internals. The breadth of the market's not that fantastic lately. And a lot of things that would lead me to be a little cautious and suspect, waiting for pullbacks, really aren't affecting the market. So in the past, people have said, well, now is different. And I always said, no, it's not, because human psychology never changes. So I've stuck to that premise for 25, 30 years of trading. No, it's not different. It's not different this time. It's not different this time. But for the first time in a long time, I can say that I'm almost sold on the concept that it is different this time. Something's different about the market this time. And I don't know if it's we're having a transition on the demographics, on the participants in the market, or what's affecting the market. Is it just this reverse psychology that we've had completely, the most negative thing that could ever happen to an economy that's based on consumer consumption? So it's really a strange thing when you see. I mean, we thought Tesla was a crazy, stock chart. What about stuff like Overstock.com? I mean, I've never seen in the past where a stock goes from $2, unless it's a micro cap percentage wise, to $120. I mean, these are unbelievable moves. $3. And you start doing the math, and you're like, man, if I'd bought 10,000 shares back then, I'm at 30 grand. I'm risking if it goes to zero, and now I have $120,000 in stock. It's insane. So, actually, no, you have $1.18 million in stock, which is you start putting the numbers together and you're just blown away. I mean, stocks that are 400% above their 200-day moving averages. I've never seen moves like this before. I mean, these are insane moves. You can go across the board. Wayfair, how do you even look at this technically? I mean, it's things that it should have done technically, where it should have pulled back along a longer term trend line. Absolutely didn't. Just blew right through it. Didn't care. Didn't matter that this one also was $23, $24, and did a 10 bagger, and then some to 324. Up 12,000% or something, or 1,200%. My math's off today, but it's almost impossible to gauge where these are going to go technically. So from channel perspectives and volume and things like that, I mean, you'd think that a few days ago you had a volume blow off high when you see this here, but nope, keeps chugging. So the only thing I really have to rely on lately is RSI. So RSI is is the way to dictate everything, is whether it's going to pull back or not. When you see us get up above, the 85, I guess it's time to pull the trigger. Here you have a big move above 85, and here you have a big move close to 85, and you get a sharp pullback. And you had a recent move above 85, and you did get a pullback. You got a pullback from 324 down to 288. Not huge, but can we get back up there? Yeah, I mean, that's what we have to focus on. Look at stocks like NVAX, which I think is ridiculous fundamentally, and I look at where it's at RSI wise, and I want to short it based on fundamentals, but that's a fib within a fib up there. But I have to wait for this to kind of come back up. Now, can this pull back without that? Yeah, because it's got some bearish divergence here. We've had a bounce, but the bounce is a lot weaker than the prior areas. So there is some divergence on NVAX, so I wouldn't put that in the same category. But that being said, there are a lot of shorts in there. On intraday, you can see it all the time. Once it starts to rise, it squeezes out the shorts. It pops higher, then it fades the rest of the day. You can see that on that's why this is such a good short, but you can't hold it and short it. So when you look at it, you can kind of see, and keep in mind these are 20-minute charts, but they pop it, they squeeze it, then it fades. They pop it, they squeeze it, and it fades. It does the same thing. They pop it, they squeeze it, and it fades. So it does tend to fade late in the day, but you have to kind of gauge, okay, where is it going to go before it starts to fade? And that usually is intraday RSIs on the hourly. But there are a couple stocks. That being said, we're trying to find stuff that hasn't moved yet, right? It hasn't had these monster moves. RXT was a recent IPO, and it did have some interesting news. They gapped it on the Amazon investing some money, but they didn't give a lot of details on that. And this is low margin business here, so I'm not too sold on this. I don't know whether you guys want to chase this move. Understand too that a lot of people that got into this IPO at $15 and $16 that were stranded, when this news came out, they were selling into it, and they're going to continue to sell into strength until they're out of their positions, if that's what they were looking to do. So you kind of have this battle now between 21 and 19 or 18 and change. So I'm not sure RXT is that one that's going to continue to rocket higher, even with the Amazon news. There are a couple that I am looking at though, and one of them is a little bit of a micro cap, and it's in the biotech, and I do like it. I like this chart, and fundamentally it's interesting too. So keep an eye on Drrx. I'm going to switch to a 1 year. Drrx has an interesting pipeline, and they got some catalysts coming up this year, and this is a very interesting chart. It looks a little boring here, I guess you'd say, because it hasn't had a monster move. We're still kind of hanging in between, low $2, upper dollars to basically $3 right in this area here. But right now it's above the 20 and the 50, and it's kind of holding it for a longer period of time than it has in many, many months. So there is some news out on earnings recently. They've always had negative earnings, negative a penny, negative 2 cents, negative 5. And last quarter they hit 7 cents a share. So if you extrapolate that out, I guess it's about almost 30 cents a year. So that puts them at 10 times earnings if that was consistent, which we don't get a lot of consistency in biotechs. And there may have been some shifting of the numbers internally there from an accounting perspective to get that number that they got to. But they do have an interesting pipeline. It is acting interestingly here. We just crossed over on the positive on the MACD. Thinkorswim doesn't have the best charts, but we kind of bounced off the 20, which we like to see, with a little more volume relative to the selling. And I kind of like this one, so I bought a couple thousand shares, and let's see what happens. I did obviously like SRNE at one point, and then hopefully you guys sold it. I mean, we were selling it at 16s and 17s and left a little money on the table, but now it looks like the smart move. I'm not sure if this is done yet. I know the Hindenburg did a hit piece on this one with some negative comments. And this is getting to be a crowded space on this COVID area, so I'm not really interested in that one right there. The other one that's kind of interesting too here, the chart that I like, and we could talk all day about Teslas and Apples and where they're going, and just buy and hold your breath and things like that, but we're trying to find stuff that really hasn't had a huge move yet. I kind of like this chart on LMPX Auto. Just needs to hold above 990, 970, 980, that kind of area on a close. I like this little pop that we saw. I like that it was on volume. I like that it was news oriented on earnings. And we're coming into kind of almost a triple top resistance at around 13 and change. And I think that if it busts through there, you really have a lot of wiggle room to the upside, blue sky territory, until you fill that gap around 20. I'm not saying that's our target price, but obviously there's going to be a lot of resistance around 15.50. But you're holding above some areas now that look interesting. Remember the last time we held above these areas, the market was kind of under a lot of selling pressure, and there was a lot of unknowns in between the earnings. And then now the earnings came out. Maybe it's a little bit of a relief rally. It's hard to say whether this has legs, but it's a pretty strong candle, and I think this one has more to go to the upside. You just have to deal with the volatility. Obviously, you don't want to see it below, like I said, maybe on the body of the candle, which is around 990 on a close. So you might have a point or so to the downside if we look at it that way. But this one could be interesting as well, especially looking at the shape of the MACD, and a decent consolidation base to give it enough power to push a lot higher. So it's going to be a lot of ups and downs with day traders going in and out. A little bit overbought on the RSI, slightly, but I do like the shape of the MACD. So let's just keep an eye on that one. I kind of like DRX more. It's more of a sleeper. David, Robert, X-Ray. There are 4 IPOs today, no interest in them. And then there's some movers. NMTR, which is a micro cap. MICT, that looks kind of interesting. Ford, not the company. Forward Industries looks somewhat interesting. FORD. And then if we look at some of our lists, obviously Qualcomm is a weird acting stock, and I know we have much higher targets on that, 123s, 124s. It's just kind of the way Qualcomm acts. Qualcomm's not going to be in the Tesla realm of stocks. It's going to kind of move to the beat of its own drum here. So yeah, it's been disappointing the last 3 or 4 days, but I wouldn't get too worked up about that if you're holding Qualcomm long. I think there's higher prices. A couple other ones to kind of look at here that look interesting technically, but now the market is the Qs are kind of getting to that 161.8 extension that we talked about, and the target price was 279 on QQQ, and we're at 275 or 276, gapping up a little bit pre-market. So we're kind of getting into the territory where maybe it does make sense to put on some shorts just for a scalp, because back to what I'm talking about, this psychologist market is unbelievable. Stocks really aren't aligned with fundamentals. They're really aligned with movement and just perception of company. So Wayfair, multi-billion-dollar company, doesn't make sense to be trading where it's at, but all that matters is the concept of stay at home and purchasing stuff online, the nesting concept of making the home more habitable for the amount of time we're spending here. These things incorporate Home Depot and Overstock and Wayfair. So the concept is more powerful than the fundamentals, and that combined with the technicals of I just want to buy it so that I can sell it higher really puts together a huge perfect storm for bullish movement across the board. And then I'll close with one that I don't know if you guys bought it, but I did. It's CMPI. And this one is just such a narrow trading range between 13 and change. This is the daily. Look at this. And I know this is a kind of funky looking chart, but if you look at this, let's look at it on a 10-day, 20-minute. Let's look at a 10-minute. It really is trying to figure out which direction it wants to go here. Is it going to break below 13, or is it going to break that 14 and change area? So I have a couple thousand shares. If it breaks there, I want to lighten up just because I don't like this back and forth forever without any discernible direction. So I'd like to lighten up a little bit into that. We'll see what happens. This could actually be a big mover. I think it's a great company, and they have a lot of backing with some big pharma names, and they got a pretty good pipeline. But the pipeline is more of a patience pays, stage 1 and stage 2. They don't have anything on stage 3. So looking for a news catalyst might be hard here. It's going to be more of traders jumping in ahead of the time, and where do they start jumping in at, or do they just get impatient here and sell? And so far they've been impatient. They've been selling into strength, which is okay because we can accumulate positions at lower levels, and then when this thing rockets, we can be unloading into the strength. Another one then I'm going to leave on this one that looks interesting is a recent IPO, GOCO, GOCO. Looks interesting if we get a pullback into the 18s here. Getting a little overbought in the RSI, but this is a newer issue, so blue sky territory. There's really no overhead resistance. Low is 15, and it broke the initial high from the first trading day, I believe. We have to go back a little further, actually. Let's go back 90 days on a 10-minute. We did, I believe, break the original high, if I'm not mistaken, or if it's pretty darn close. No, we didn't break it. Original high was actually 22, so that could be good or bad. Looks like it's heading in that direction. Obviously, within the first few days of trading, this broke down around 2021, so it literally might be heading into some big resistance here. Actually, the high was 26. So, but it's an interesting chart. I mean, if you were holding it in this area in here, this is kind of where it broke down, and it's nice to see that now it's above that area. So if you were holding it looking for higher prices and it bottomed here, bottomed here, bottomed here, and then this is kind of where it broke down, and that's where it started getting to oversold. So a lot of people panicked out of it in the 18s, and for it to get back up there and get above there is nice. I'd like to see it pull back there and hold that resistance area, which support now becomes resistance at 1880. See if it can pull back there, but it seems to be wanting to move higher. Interesting company too if you look it up. I did a little research on Seeking Alpha. So CVAC was the one that was a monster trade. I think that one might be done here slightly. It's hard to say. It seems to be holding this $70 area with a high, a pre-market of 95. So I'll have to see how that goes. And those other ones that I do like that I mentioned prior, so let's keep an eye on those as well. MCRB is also one. I kept saying I'm going to close on that one, but I don't know if NCRB can sustain this move fundamentally that it's making, but it keeps producing these little cup and handles, these little curls, and that's an interesting chart too. I just think that it's got resistance at like 28 from the old pivot breakdown point, so I'd be a little bit cautious as it gets closer to 28, and it's pretty close to it right now. But this one's been interesting stock too, and there is some fundamental news that they got that moving to the upside. So let's keep an eye on that one as well. But the one that I do like that's a sleeper is Drrx. Direct Corporation, DURECT. You'll probably have to be patient though. Drrx.